Sarah Hurwitz was a speechwriter in the Obama White House. She worked both for President Obama and for Mrs. Obama. And towards the end of her book, she writes about going to Mrs. Obama's memorial service. And she writes, Mrs. Robinson was no stranger to racism, so she made sure her children knew who they were and had the confidence to take risks and build lives worthy of their dreams. Don't worry about whether anybody else likes you, she told them. Come home, we'll always like you here. And that struck me as a perfect metaphor for Israel. When Rav Jen and I arrived in Israel, we discovered that one of our suitcases did not arrive with us. On the flight, when we were boarding the flight in Munich for the second leg of our flight, putting away my luggage in the overhead bin, I suddenly turned and I pulled or tore something in my calf muscle. So I spent the week and a half hobbling. And so here we are by the lost luggage counter, and I'm barely standing, and we're trying to figure out where our suitcase is, mostly with Rav Jen stuff. Oops. And we went through all of the paperwork, and we did everything. And then the person said, Bruchim habayta, welcome home. And we thought, that's Israel. Welcome home. So we were there not for vacation. We were there not for visiting family, although we did get to visit family. We were there to attend primarily the World Zionist Congress. And the World Zionist Congress is a fascinating thing. My son's friend Benji says that's where we get the World Zionist conspiracy. I said, but there are too many people who can't keep a secret, and we are transparent about what's going on. But it's 2,500 people, all coming from around the world, to talk about what are the priorities for Israel and the worldwide Jewish community in terms of the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Keren Kayemet LeYisrael, which is JNF in Israel, and Keren HaYesod, which takes care of Jewish communities around the world. This was my 4th Congress. Has anyone here been to or watched on TV Question Period? Yeah? So if you watch Question Period, a particularly raucous Question Period, when you watch Question Period, one, it's amazing because you can actually ask anything you want. You could say, I don't know why the Prime Minister chooses those socks every week, whatever. But in reality, it's a time for each party to get their sound bites on the news. And sometimes there's heckling from the other side, and there's cheering from one's own party, and it can get to be really crazy, and sometimes the speaker has to calm people down. The World Zionist Congress is Question Period times 1,000. We start as organizational groups preparing. So the first 2 days are spent talking about what resolutions we are bringing, what resolutions are being brought. The resolutions are published in draft form before the Congress, what we agree with, what we don't agree with, so we can see all of them beforehand. Some of them are, as was described to us, motherhood and apple pie. You know, we want to promote more teaching of Hebrew around the world. Who doesn't want to do that? But other things are more contentious, and Merkaz brought a few of those more contentious issues. There are 1,400 delegates, a third of them based on the breakdown of the Knesset, any of the parties in Israel that signed the Jerusalem Program, which is the definition of Zionism by the World Zionist Organization. So if you are a Zionist party, you get to send delegates. 1/3 of the delegates come from the United States, because they are essentially 1/3 of the Jewish population in the world, and 1/3 come from the rest of the world. There are billions of dollars and positions of power at stake. So you can imagine that people are a little passionate about what's happening at the Congress. This has been going on since 1897. If you go to a Congress, you'll wonder how Theodor Herzl and the Zionist movement ever actually got anything done. But if you know about question period and the government here, you understand that that's just what we do. It's theater, it's sound bites, and what happens is really going on in the background in negotiations behind closed doors. This is one of the few places in the world where the political, social, and religious spectrums, the entire spectrum, work together, or at least come in the same room to yell at each other for a little while. It's just an amazing thing. And I understand from some people who were there, some of the younger people who were there were part of a different organization, they only got to see the question period piece. They only got to see the raucous nature of the plenary with people yelling or voting against things that they thought should be simple. Merkaz has a very active group chat, thank God for WhatsApp, so that every member of the Merkaz delegation, whether a delegate, an alternate, an observer, knows exactly what's going on, not just when we're in the room, but when committee meetings are going on, so we all know and we can put in our 2 cents, sometimes our 10 cents, and we see what's happening. This trip was different than every other trip I've taken before. And I've lost count of how many times I've been to Israel. My first trip was in 1981. I was with my parents, with my congregation. I was celebrating my bat mitzvah. I celebrated my bat mitzvah at Masada. You know, we did all of the things you're supposed to do on a trip to Israel. The boys, of course, celebrated their b'nai mitzvah at the kotel. At the time, the mechitza at the kotel came up to here. I know because I have pictures. It's not just my memory, I have pictures. The mechitza came up to here, and we were able to stand at the mechitza in the back, and the men and the boys were at tables in the front, or in the back of the space right in front of us. And we were able to see and hear. And over the years, Israel's become more polarized, and the mechitza has risen to about here. The first morning that we were in Israel, we went as a delegation to the Masorti Kotel. If you imagine the Kotel, and you know there's the men's section, there's the women's section, and there's the Mugrabi ramp, and then there's security. Well, outside security, there is another entrance, and you can go down to a platform, and that's the Masorti Kotel. Men and women can stand and pray together. Not only do conservative Jews use this, not only do Reform Jews use this, and secular and others, but Orthodox families come to stand together before weddings, before b'nai mitzvah, to take pictures, to be together. It is become known as HaKotel HaMishpachti, the family kotel. And you used to be able to go up to the Kotel and put your hand on the wall, and 7 years ago, a rock fell, damaging the platform. And now you can only go to about, 9 yards from the wall itself. One of the resolutions that was brought was it's time. It's time. Of course, the wall was fixed immediately, but the platform has been ignored because we feel that Israel, the government, does not value all of its citizens. When the same thing happened in the men's section, the wall was fixed as quickly, but then the stones on the ground, the davening space, was fixed within 2 days. So it's not just in the Masorti Kotel where these things happen. And so one of the resolutions that the World Zionist Organization will be pushing, will be lobbying the government about, is fix this space that is a space for all Jews. But that morning, in the moment, I wasn't really thinking about the rock. I wasn't really thinking about the fact that I couldn't go up to the Kotel. This is the first trip where I haven't actually touched the Kotel, because we were davening Shacharit. And I was thinking, as I gathered my tzitzit and we recited Me'er Bakim Fota Aretz, that we take all of the Jews from all the corners of the earth, that this is why I was in Israel. Because I was going to gather with Jews from Australia, from the Far East, from England, from Uganda, from Zimbabwe, from South America, from North America, all over Europe. We were going to gather together, and we were going to accept each other as Jews, and we were going to talk about what we want our Israel and our worldwide Jewish community to look like. It's not the first time that arriving in Israel has brought tears to my eyes. But I would say, aside from my high school trip, it was the most emotional. The next day, we began the Congress. And I don't know if anyone here was following the news, but every day it seemed like something crazy was happening. Early on, Mizrahi, so there are 2 blocks. There's the center-left block, and there's the right. And early on, Mizrahi, which is part of the right block, realized that Eretz HaKodesh was going to sell them down the river. And Mizrahi came to Merkaz. The head of Mizrahi came to the head of our delegation, it was Yishar Hess, who spoke here in the spring, and said to him, I want to create an agreement. I'm not going to join, Mizrahi is not going to join the center-left. It's not who we are. But we'll make an agreement, we'll sign a signed agreement that we won't vote for anything without you, and you don't vote for anything without us. During this time, Likud was, as Rav Jen kept calling it, creating a circular firing squad. There are those who are staunch supporters of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and those who are seeing that perhaps there are some cracks in the party. And so Yaakov Hagoel, who has been the chair for the World Zionist Organization for the last 5 years, but has been critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu, was being ousted in favor of Doron Perez. And Rabbi Doron Perez, if you don't know, is the father of slain Tzahal officer Captain Daniel Perez, whose body had been returned only shortly before. And so the hope was that Rabbi Perez could unite the party, but watching from the sidelines, it was very clear this was not happening. And Miki Zohar, who is a staunch Netanyahu fan, kept pushing for more and more. And because it is normally done that you want an agreement before the last day of the Congress, when all of the voting takes place, Merkaz, as well as the rest of us in the center and those on the left, said, well, it's not unreasonable what he's asking for. What he was asking for was some more money for a new ministry of Hasbara, of publicity for Israel. I'm not sure that we need more money and a new Hasbara ministry. We just might need different Hasbara. But we as a group agreed to it. And then suddenly the night before going into the plenary, when each group offers up the names, the list of names they plan on appointing to the positions they are receiving, suddenly Yair Netanyahu's name appeared as the head of this new ministry. Aside from the nepotism, which created an uproar, Yair Netanyahu is living in Miami. He has no experience politically in terms of running a ministry. And every part of the agreement that had been so painstakingly negotiated over the last couple of weeks fell apart. At this very same time, the city of Jerusalem granted a permit to a group that was creating a protest against a draft bill, which we were pushing for at the Congress. And they were going to be bringing tens of thousands of protesters into Jerusalem right at the moment that the Congress was supposed to end, and Israel announced they would be shutting down transit. The buses would stop running at a certain point. The trains would stop running at a certain point. And suddenly, everything was blown up. And so the voting part of the Congress was moved from Thursday morning to Wednesday night. All of the resolutions that had been decided at committee were going to be voted on. I had the benefit of being an alternate, and since all of our delegates were there, I got to continue with my previously scheduled plans, which took me to Beit HaLochem. If you don't know Beit HaLochem, they work with wounded soldiers and families of wounded soldiers with rehabilitation, physical, emotional, mental. I got to play wheelchair basketball, a lot of fun. But I got to talk with people who have been keeping our country going for the last 2 years. I went to what's called a recovery or rehabilitation farm. It's a moshav where they have a farm area where they're doing not only mental therapy, emotional therapy, but art therapy, not just psychological therapy, but art therapy, dance therapy, working with survivors. I got to talk with people at the same time that I was there. Yara Sachs was there gathering information. She was the Minister for Mental Health and Addiction, and this is an area that is very important to her. And so she was speaking with a lot of the survivors of Nova who have been working so hard to bring home the hostages, and now that the far majority of the hostages have come home, they're not sure what to do with themselves. And so she passed on to me that day, 23 survivors were in 24-hour suicide watch. Because having lost that purpose, having fulfilled their purpose, they were now hit with all of the trauma from the last 2 years. And so I got to speak with her and not with those individuals, but with other hostages. When I returned to Binyanei Ha'umah, where the Congress was taking place, I returned about 10 o'clock at night. Voting was still going on. They went until almost midnight. And then, with that news of Yair Netanyahu, voted to prolong the Congress for 2 weeks, because clearly there would be no resolution of an agreement at that time. 2 weeks allows everyone who was taking a little time after the Congress to spend in Israel to get home and participate electronically. The votes, the unwillingness to give into the extreme right, and even the dissent that we're seeing in Likud demonstrated to me and to others that when the Jewish world in Israel and in the diaspora come together, we are not actually extreme. We are not as polarized as the news seems to say. There is a very clear liberal and pluralistic majority who want to see an Israel that caters to all its citizens and to all Jews everywhere. That in Israel, that as it says in the Declaration of Independence, cares for all its citizens regardless of race, of gender, regardless of religious affiliation, whether Jewish and within the Jewish spectrum or not, Israel cares. And so, some of the resolutions I want to share with you this morning. One was that Merkaz brought us 50% more funding will go to the religious streams. That means programs for Masorti, programs for reform. It also means Orthodox programs. We, as the center, as we've seen this polarization, have become the place everyone goes to talk. The left isn't speaking to the right, but they're both talking to us. And so our voice has been amplified and elevated. And when we say we have to work together because we see what's happening, when we only cater to one side or the other, people are listening. And so we have a 50% increase in allocation. We knew it would pass. What we didn't know is it passed on a margin of 2-1. We have increased funding for specifically Merkaz's Zionist and Israel programming. We have expanded Masorti representation on the boards of the organizations that will make these funding allocations and policy decisions. This comes from a 15% increase in our delegation. We were the only delegation in the center-left bloc to grow in this election since 2020. We were the largest Merkaz delegation we've ever had. On the right, it's Eretz HaKodesh that's growing. The last 5 years, the top positions at all of the organizations were held by right-wing and Haredi blocs. This time, the center-left will hold half. Yair Netanyahu will not hold any position that requires political approval. I expect he'll remain in Miami. Extremist allies of Otzma Yehudit and Ben Gvir are out of holding any positions in the World Zionist Organization, in the Jewish Agency, or in Keren Kayemet L'Yisrael. We passed a draft law called for by Merkaz, 427 for the draft law, that there should be an equitable draft across all levels of Israeli society. Only 109 against, 12 abstained, and the Haredi groups walked out. But if you choose not to vote, you don't have a voice. We also passed a resolution calling for an apolitical and impartial State Commission of Inquiry into October 7th. That was 321 for and 216 against. You can imagine part, but not all, of Likud was against that. And we asked for infrastructure at the Kotel to care about all of the groups equally. And that one also passed in a ratio of 2-to-1. It's more and more clear that with changes to a private ballot, it used to be, I think my first Congress, you had a card, one color for pro, one color for against, one color for abstain. And so if you held up your hand, everyone in the room knew how you were voting. But it's clear to us that not only the center and the left, but Mizrahi, people within Likud, people in other right organizations care about Israel and the Jewish world being a place for all of us. And I go back to that statement by Mrs. Robinson, Michelle Obama's mother. Because when you come here, you are home. Here, everyone will like you, even if they don't. I walked out of my hotel on Thursday morning into a sea of Haredim. It was a bit of a heat wave. I hadn't really thought about what I was walking into when I got dressed that morning, but I was in a sleeveless top, pants, and it's an interesting feeling to walk through that as a woman. None of the protesters there were women. They didn't come. One other resolution that passed was to increase the required gender divide within each delegation. Currently, 25% of delegates from any one group have to be female. The other 75 can be male. We are now raising that to 40%. And the far right doesn't want it. Because when you give voices to others within your group, things change. It's interesting, it's fascinating to watch. When you see the delegations of Eretz HaKodesh, primarily from the United States, the people who are speaking are the women. It's not just the men speaking out, but in Israel, it's only the men. And walking through this group without sleeves, it makes it easier to walk through, opens a wide swath. It's a weird feeling. But when I look at the votes, I have to think that some of those people, either the women themselves or people who have daughters, who have sisters, who have mothers, who they look at and say, they're not just second-class citizens. When we see Mizrahi saying, clearly this right-wing group is no longer caring about us, but only about themselves, so we're going to vote with you, we see that there can be an Israel that's for everybody. Excuse me. When Israel is held up to a higher standard against every other country, it's wrong. I don't expect Israel to be better than every other country. I expect all of the countries I care about to be better. I expect Canada to be better, and I work towards that. Excuse me. I expect, as a citizen of the United States, that it be better. And I work towards that. And I expect, as a Jew, as a participant in the World Zionist Congress, as someone who loves Israel, that Israel should be better because it should be what it aspires to be in its declaration. A home and a place for all of its citizens and for Jews all around the world.